On my 18th birthday, the candles were still burning when my father raised his glass and looked straight at me. "From this night on," he said, voice like gravel, "you are no longer my daughter." The room froze. My mother stared at her plate. My brother smirked, soaking in the applause for his Stanford acceptance letter. And me? I sat there gripping the enlistment papers I had already signed, the ink still drying. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd crumble. Instead, I walked out of that house with nothing but a duffel bag and a promise to myself. If my own blood wouldn't claim me, the army would. To understand why my father's words landed like a hammer on my 18th birthday, you have to know the house I grew up in. From the outside, our place in San Antonio looked picture-perfect flagpole in the front yard, family photos on the mantle, trophies lined up like proof of discipline. Inside, love was measured, rationed out only to those who lived up to his impossible standards. My father, Sergeant Major Richard Torres, wore his uniform long after retirement. He believed order was love, and obedience was proof. My younger brother Julian thrived under that system. Every A he brought home was celebrated. Every football touchdown became a family holiday. For me, it was different. I ran track, broke records, even earned a spot at regionals. The medal gleamed in my hand, but when I looked up from the podium, the seat where my father should have been was empty. He was across town at Julian's orientation, shaking hands with professors as if his legacy was secure. At home, my accomplishments barely made the dinner conversation. "That's nice, Camila," my mother would say softly, but her eyes always flicked to my father, waiting for his verdict. He would nod, grunt, and change the subject back to Julian's prospects. The message was clear. I could work twice as hard, bleed twice as much, and still never be enough. The night he disowned me wasn't the first time I felt abandoned. It was simply the loudest. For years, I had trained myself to swallow silence, to accept that my place in the Torres family hierarchy was below the fold. But sitting on that sofa in my best dress, listening to applause meant for Julian, something in me snapped. If survival was my only inheritance, then I would carry it like armor, and the army would teach me how to sharpen it into a weapon. The night my father disowned me, I walked out of that house with nothing but a duffel bag and my enlistment papers. No savings, no plan, just a stubborn streak that burned hotter than the Texas summer. For the first few weeks, I slept on the couch at my best friend Shelby's apartment. She and her mom gave me a roof, but I knew I couldn't stay forever. So I took whatever jobs would pay cash mopping floors at a gas station at dawn, scrubbing mud off pickup trucks at a car wash until my fingers cracked open. My palms were raw, my back ached, but quitting wasn't an option. One morning, halfway through a 12-hour shift, I sat slumped outside the gas station, dirt under my nails, sweat soaking through my shirt. A woman I'd never seen before pressed a steaming cup of coffee into my hands. "First step to respect," she said, "is just surviving." She didn't wait for a thank you. She just walked away, like an angel in work boots. Her words stuck to me harder than the grime on my uniform. Survive, that was the mission. When my ship date for basic combat training finally arrived, I felt more relief than fear. Fort Jackson wasn't home, but at least it wasn't San Antonio. At least there, the rules were clear. Work hard or wash out. The first weeks were brutal. I was smaller than most of the other recruits, and my body lagged behind. I was always the last across the finish line, lungs burning like fire, legs shaking. During rifle drills, my arms wobbled from the weight. The others grumbled when I slowed the platoon's pace. One night, after collapsing during a ruck march, I braced myself for the storm from my drill sergeant. Instead, Staff Sergeant Lee crouched down until his eyes were level with mine. His voice was firm, not angry. "Torres, look in that mirror over there. Who do you see?" I turned to the dingy restroom mirror in the corner. A skinny, exhausted girl with hollow eyes stared back. "No one here is going to carry you," he said. "Not me, not them. The Army doesn't hand out respect. You earn it, mile by mile, rep by rep. Question is, do you want it bad enough?" Something shifted in me that night. For the first time, someone hadn't compared me to Julian. They hadn't dismissed me as invisible. They'd put the responsibility squarely on me. The next morning, I started getting up before reveille. While others slept, I ran laps around the track until my chest screamed. I taped blisters, iced swollen knees, and pushed anyway. At Chow, I traded desserts for protein packs. Slowly, painfully, the gap began to close. By the end of the second month, I wasn't finishing last anymore. One morning during PT, I crossed the line ahead of half the platoon. The shock on their faces almost made me laugh. By graduation, I wasn't just keeping up. I'd been named squad leader. The girl who once collapsed under her ruck was now setting the pace, calling cadence, pushing others to dig deeper. That promotion meant more to me than any medal. It wasn't about recognition from my father or the applause Julian always got. It was about proving to myself that I was stronger than the silence I'd grown up in. The night before graduation, I sat on my bunk with a pen in my hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper. For the first time in months, I thought about writing to my parents, to tell them I'd made it, that their daughter wasn't a disgrace but a soldier. But the words felt hollow. I knew they wouldn't hear them. Instead, I tucked the letter away and slipped a photo into the envelope. Me, standing in my Army service uniform, brass polished, spine straight, eyes locked on the camera. No caption. No explanation. Just proof. Proof that I had survived. Proof that I was building something no one could erase. After graduation, my path took me further. I commissioned through OCS, traded the private's chevrons for a second lieutenant's gold bar. My training intensified. My responsibilities grew. The Army became my family, my barracks, my home. But the echoes of my father's words never fully left. Each time I was overlooked for recognition, each time someone doubted me, I felt that night at the dinner table replaying in my chest. And each time I answered it the same way, with another mile, another rep, another mission completed. Over the years, the promotions came steadily, from second lieutenant to first lieutenant, then to captain. Each ceremony was another layer of armor over the scar my father left behind. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the girl crying into a pillow over a lost medal or an absent father. I was an officer, a leader, a survivor. And yet, every time I walked across the stage, I couldn't help but wonder, did they know? Did they still tell people I was a disgrace? Or had that photo in the envelope finally spoken louder than my silence ever could? Either way, it didn't matter. The Army had claimed me when my bloodline would not, and for the first time in my life, I was proud of the name stitched across my chest, Torres. The years after basic blurred into deployments, promotions, and long nights in desert outposts where the wind carried more grit than air. I lived by mission cycles, not birthdays. Every new rank stitched onto my chest felt like another wall between me and the girl who had been cast out of her own home. By the time I pinned on captain's bars, I had stopped expecting to hear from San Antonio. That silence had become background noise, a hum I learned to live with. Until one evening, a message pinged my inbox from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was only one word: Dad. I opened it slowly. It was from my mother. Camila, your father isn't well. The doctors say his heart is weaker than he lets on. He still won't admit it. He won't ask for you. But I think he wants to see you. On his terms. No apologies. No speeches. Just his presence. Mom. I sat frozen at my desk, the cursor blinking back at me like a dare. For years, I had dreamed of him calling me my daughter again. Now, the invitation was laced with barbed wire. On his terms. No apologies. No acknowledgement of the night he disowned me. Just silence, dressed as pride. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to jump on the next flight home, to cling to whatever scraps of reconciliation were left. Another part of me felt the old fury rise. The voice that said, why should I go crawling back? Haven't I bled enough for his approval? That night, I called Shelby, my old friend who'd once offered me her couch. She listened quietly, then said, Cam, you don't owe him a performance, but maybe you owe yourself the chance to see where you stand now, not as the girl he disowned, as the officer you became. Her words hit harder than she knew. I decided I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't soften my edges to fit back into a mold he created. If I went home, it wouldn't be as the desperate teenager he threw out. It would be as Major Torres, the officer I had fought to become. The timing couldn't have been sharper. Just weeks later, my promotion orders came down. I was being elevated to Major 04. A ceremony was scheduled, the kind with flags lined across the stage, and families invited to watch their loved one take the next step. When I got the email, my first instinct was to delete it. My family didn't belong at my ceremonies. They hadn't been there for my commissioning, my deployments, my captaincy. Why should they stand and clap now? But something in me shifted. Maybe it was Shelby's reminder. Maybe it was the years of swallowing silence. Maybe it was the thought of walking across that stage with no one in the audience, knowing my father's heart might not give me another chance. So I sent the invitation, not begging, not apologizing, just 4 lines. Promotion ceremony, Fort Hood Auditorium, 0900 hours, attendance optional. No exclamation points. No, love, Camila. Just the details, plain and military. If they came, it would be their choice. If they didn't, I would carry on like I always had without them. In the days leading up, I rehearsed every possible outcome. Them ignoring me. Them showing up only to gloat. Them refusing to acknowledge me even in uniform. But I also rehearsed something else. Standing tall no matter what. I laid out my Army Green Service uniform the night before, pressing every crease until it looked sharp enough to cut. My medals and ribbons were lined up in perfect regulation order, not for their eyes, but for mine. I thought back to the woman with the coffee outside the gas station. First step to respect is surviving. I had done more than survive. I had thrived. And tomorrow, I would stand in front of the world not as the disgrace my father named me, but as proof that I had outgrown the box he tried to bury me in. I spent that night in silence, staring at the ceiling, replaying the old wound of his voice, declaring I was no longer his daughter. I let the anger run its course. Then I set it down like a rucksack too heavy to carry any longer. Tomorrow wouldn't be about him. It wouldn't even be about me. It would be about the truth finally having its moment in the light. I closed my eyes and whispered the words I wished someone had told me years ago. You are enough, and you're going to walk into that room like you own it. Operation Truth wasn't written in a notebook this time. It was written in the way I'd stand, the way I'd salute, the way I'd accept my rank without shrinking. When the morning came, I buttoned my uniform with steady hands. The mirror reflected not the forgotten teenager, but a soldier forged in fire. And whether my father showed up or not, the stage was already set. The auditorium at Fort Hood hummed with quiet anticipation. Rows of soldiers in pressed uniforms filled the front, their families scattered through the back. Flags stood tall on the stage, their colors vivid under the spotlights. I stood backstage, smoothing the front of my Army Green Service uniform one last time. My chest felt tight, not from nerves about the ceremony itself I had earned this promotion, but from the possibility that my parents might be in the audience. When the command sergeant major called my name, I marched onto the stage with measured steps, the click of my low heels sharp against the polished floor. The audience applauded politely. I saluted the presiding officer, then stood at attention. As my eyes scanned the crowd, I saw them. My mother, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes shining with something between pride and fear. My brother Julian, jaw set, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in uniform before him. And beside them, my father Richard Torres, older, thinner, but still sitting like a man carved from stone. The ceremony began. Speeches about leadership, sacrifice, duty, words I had lived, words that had kept me alive through years of doubt. I kept my gaze forward, refusing to look at them again. Then came the moment. The officer called me forward to receive my new rank. My mother and father were invited to the stage to pin the gold oak leaves on my shoulders. For a heartbeat, the room was still. I wondered if they would refuse. But then, I saw movement. My mother rose first, tugging at my father's sleeve. He stood slowly, his steps unsteady but deliberate. Together they approached, the sound of their shoes echoing across the hall. As they reached me, the presiding officer asked gently, "Sir, ma'am, what's your relation to Major Select Torres?" My father's lips parted, the microphone catching every syllable. "She's my daughter." The words detonated in the air. For years, I had been erased, a disgrace, an exile. Now, in front of soldiers, officers, and strangers, he reclaimed me with 3 words I thought I'd never hear again. My mother's hands trembled as she affixed one side of the insignia to my shoulder. My father's fingers fumbled slightly with the other. his touch lingering longer than it needed to. His eyes, once so cold, brimmed with something I hadn't seen since childhood. When the last pin was in place, the officer stepped back and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, Major Camila Torres." The hall erupted in applause. My heart pounded, my throat tight. I stood tall, saluting the flag, refusing to let tears blur my vision. As the crowd quieted, my father did something that shook me more than his words had. He straightened, heels clicking together, and raised his hand in a crisp salute directed at me. The room seemed to hold its breath. A retired sergeant major, who once disowned his daughter, now saluting her as an officer. The weight of that moment crushed the years of silence, the humiliation, the exile. I returned the salute, my hand steady, though inside I was breaking open. Afterward, the official photos were taken. My father stood beside me stiffly, his hand resting lightly on my back. My mother leaned in close, her tears dampening the fabric of my jacket. Julian hovered, conflicted, his pride battling years of rivalry. When the crowd dispersed, my father pulled me aside. His voice was low, rough, stripped of its usual authority. "Camila," he said, "I was wrong. About you. About everything. I thought breaking you would make you stronger. I see now it only made you walk away. I'm sorry." The apology wasn't elegant. It wasn't complete, but it was real, and that was enough. Julian approached then, shoulders squared, eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "Major Torres," he said, voice formal but warm, "permission to salute." I almost laughed at the stiffness, but instead I nodded. He raised his hand, and for the first time, my brother saluted me not as competition, but as respect. That night, we gathered at my small apartment. Nothing fancy, just takeout containers spread across the kitchen table. But it felt different. My father, once the judge at every family meal, passed me the first plate. My mother reached for my hand before grace. Julian cracked a joke, and we all laughed awkward at first, then freer, like a weightlifting. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a full erasure of the past, but it was a start. For years, I had carried the shame of being disowned like a hidden scar. That day at Fort Hood, under the bright lights and in front of witnesses, the scar became a badge. The girl who had walked out with nothing but a duffel bag was gone. In her place stood Major Camila Torres, soldier, survivor, daughter reclaimed. Operation Truth had succeeded, and the battlefield had been a stage lined with flags. The weeks after my promotion felt like stepping into a different life. For the first time in years, family dinners weren't battlefields. My father still spoke in clipped sentences, still kept his emotions guarded, but something had shifted. When I walked into the room, he didn't see a disgrace, he saw an officer. He didn't call me stubborn or reckless anymore. He called me Major. One evening, we gathered at my apartment again. A small kitchen table, plates of food passed back and forth, laughter breaking through the old tension. My father lifted a piece of bread and handed it across to me. Such a simple gesture, but it carried more weight than any medal pinned to my chest. It was an acknowledgement. I had a place at the table again. My mother cried more easily now, not out of shame, but out of relief. Julian, once the golden child, treated me not as competition, but as a teammate. Slowly, brick by brick, the wall between us began to crumble. Yet I knew this wasn't about erasing the past. Forgiveness is not about pretending wounds never happened. It's about giving truth a seat at the table. My father's apology didn't undo the night he disowned me, but it allowed something new to grow in the space where bitterness once lived. Years passed. Promotions came. Responsibilities grew heavier. When I finally pinned on Lieutenant Colonel's silver oak leaves, the same family that had once turned their backs sat proudly in the front row. My father stood taller that day, though age had bent his shoulders. He told anyone within earshot, "That's my daughter up there." And I believed him. Looking back, survival had been my first mission. Every blistered hand, every cold night on Shelby's couch, every mile I ran before sunrise, they weren't just steps toward a career. They were steps toward reclaiming my own worth. Now, as I stand here telling you this, I want you to hear me clearly. Blood doesn't guarantee respect. Approval doesn't always come when you need it most. Sometimes, the very people who should lift you up will try to break you down. But you are not defined by the ones who walk away. You are defined by how you rise. Maybe your family wrote you off. Maybe your victories were ignored. Maybe you've been called a failure at the very table where you should have been loved. If that's your story, let mine be proof. Survival can turn into strength, and strength into honor. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms it. It takes what was meant to bury you and builds something that lasts. When I put on this uniform, it isn't just for me. It's for every 18-year-old kid clutching a duffel bag, told they'll never be enough. It's for every son or daughter cast out by the very people meant to protect them. It's for you, whoever needs to hear that you are stronger than the silence surrounding you. So if you're still watching right now, it means this story spoke to you. And maybe, just maybe, it was meant for you. Subscribe, share your own story in the comments. And remember this: survival is the first step to respect. Forgiveness is the final step to freedom.